Hello Bits and Bones, my name is Lady V, and welcome to my channel. When I did my 2021 Year in Books recap, I was scrolling through and found that I'd read a lot of graphic novels with relevant cultural ties, and I said I'd make a video recommending them, and it's been a couple months, but I'm here now, I'm on it. Let's talk about some great graphic novels that tie into real-world events and cultures that could both enthrall and enlighten you. First, I'm going to start with the one that hits closest to my home, and that's a graphic novel called Sugar Falls, A Residential School Story by David Alexander Robertson. When I was reading this and I brought it up to my partner, I was disappointed to hear that they had very little grasp on what a residential school was. We were taught them vaguely in our public school, but our teachers didn't graze the reality of what they really were. Destructive colonization, a subtle form of cultural genocide on the premise of well-meaning religious conversion, and breeding grounds for child abuse and corruption. I only know more about the history of residential schools because I took the time to look it up myself after classes and took a Canadian literature class in university, which still didn't do the travesty very much justice. In 2021, when hundreds of Native American children's bodies were finally being found and exhumed from churches' lands, and the Every Child Matters movement was in full force, I feel like a lot of us, aka descendants of immigrations to this land, raised in the poorly informed public school system, kind of shrugged it off because they didn't understand how many children died and how many families were broken by residential schools. People want to think of it as a thing of the past, but there are lasting consequences from residential schools that are still affecting communities today. The last residential school didn't close until 1998. That's our lifetime and something that we need to be aware of. Sugar Falls is a great way to educate and introduce yourself to the history of residential schools. Honestly, it's a graphic novel for all ages. Even though it alludes to some very dark topics and things that happen, they're not explicitly shown, so it might just go over top of younger people's heads. The next graphic novel I'd like to suggest is Little White Duck, A Childhood in China by Na Lui and translated by Andres Vera Martinez. Little White Duck takes place in China in the 1970s. It's the most notably stylized of the graphic novels on this list, which gives it an air of time and authenticity. Little White Duck is a humble story that is both full of childish wonder and grounding realities. I had quite a fun time reading it and getting to see a lifestyle so apart from the one that I've experienced, and that's really the reason I made this video list, to offer up easy ends to understand and empathize with other people's. Little White Duck isn't a sad story necessarily, but there were moments in it that certainly left me disquieted and thoughtful. Now, to lighten the mood a little bit, the next on our list is Displacement by Kiku Hughes. Displacement is a much more modern-feeling graphic novel. It's told with a clear narrative and character journey, whereas the others are more a matter in character study. Timepieces, if you will. In Displacement, we follow the main character Kiku, who is transported back in time to the 1940s, where she is put through the same experiences her own grandmother once faced at her age in a World War II Japanese-American internment camp. Displacement is a great vehicle from present day to past. Readers are put in the position of Kiku, a descendant so separated from her ancestors she just doesn't know what kinds of injustices they faced, and is only afterwards truly able to see how those events have vibrated through the layers of history all the way back to her. Now, the most brutal on the list, which is saying a lot considering we started with residential schools, is the graphic novel Between Shades of Grey, adapted by Andrew Donkin, original author Retta Sepetys, and illustrated by Dave Kopka. Between Shades of Grey takes place in 1941 and follows a Lithuanian family rounded up and deported to Siberia by Soviet secret police. This is a story about the innocent casualties of war. Of course, I know how terrible people can be to one another, but reading about these brutal circumstances and inhumane treatments takes another level when they're referencing a real conflict and one that I'd never heard about before. This book is a tragedy, and it just might break your heart. The style used Between Shades of Grey is undoubtedly the most artistic of the lot. It's a muted but gritty watercolor that perfectly conveys the tone of the story. I was so struck by the artwork that I saved 2 images from it so that I could show them to others later when I recommend the book, and I'll show them now on screen. Just look at the underlying rage, that passion communicated through one still image. In the story itself, the main character Lena's favorite artist is referenced to be Munch, and the illustrator for this story, Dave Kopka, captured that essence masterfully. Just look at the pain in this portraiture. If nothing else, I'd recommend picking up Between Shades of Grey for the emotions conveyed through the art alone. And the last on the list was my personal favorite, The Magic Fish by Trung Le Nguyen. The Magic Fish is about a young boy named Tien, son of Vietnamese immigrants with a less than fluent understanding of English. Tien struggles to communicate with his mother generally, and doubly so struggles to tell her about his sexuality, not knowing how accepted or common his feelings were back where his parents came from. The Magic Fish is overall just very wholesome, but I enjoyed it most because of its fluid incorporation of fairy tales, how they affect real life, and vice versa. The Magic Fish is the lightest of the culturally relevant graphic novels that I've mentioned, so you can read it as a pick-me-up, but despite the rather depressing nature of the others, I'd highly recommend picking at least one up. All these recommendations bring a whole new level to educating yourself through empathy from what others have gone through. The visuals do that little something extra that regular books can't sometimes. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed that list. If you have any other culturally relevant graphic novels to recommend, please do so in the comments. I'd love to pick more up. And if you do pick any of these up on my recommendation, let me know what you learned from them, because there's definitely so many things that I read in these that I had no idea about before. Anyways, thanks as always for watching. If you want more graphic novel suggestions, you can follow me on Goodreads. I'm currently on another huge graphic novel binge, so I'd love to share that with you. A special thanks to my patrons, and if you'd like to support me, I'll have links to my Patreon in the description below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!